Hello everybody and welcome to a Project Eggbites math video. So in this video, I will explain 5 original tips and tricks for JC Mathematics. And so these are the 5 tips I have in general. These may not be specific to a topic, but I think can help across all the topics. And so these 5 topics will be that spamming questions does indeed work, but you have to do it smartly. People say that if you do enough questions, you will somehow get it. And it's true, but you need to look at each question afterwards and see what you can learn from it. Another thing is that when you do all these questions, it will expose you to different scenarios. And it's these different scenarios that increase your adaptability. You should focus on the strategy rather than the answer. And there are 2 more tips. They are more so of a last resort, whether it's for the exam or studying. And so the first tip will be that you should spam questions. Now, the thing is that your school will give you plenty of revision questions that even my teachers say that it's impossible to do everything. And besides the work that your school gives you, there are other online resources such as the Holy Grail, the Project Eggbites Google Drive, friends and tutors via Telegram and WhatsApp, and if you do enough questions, you'll realize that patterns begin to emerge, and that a lot of the answers just rely on the simple fundamentals that you learned before. And so what is important after each question, even if you get it correct, find what makes the question interesting, difficult, or unique that makes it worth keeping in mind. And so here's an example. Let's say you are given that sine ln 1 plus x equal x minus half x squared plus 1 over 6 x cubed plus dot dot dot. Find the series for cosine ln 1 plus x. This isn't necessarily an entire question, but it's just one part of it which is interesting. And so you realize actually that from the first two, that if you differentiate the entire thing, you can actually get your cosine ln 1 plus x plus the differentiated part inside the ln 1 plus x. And so if you bring up and you manipulate the right hand side, you eventually get the answer for cosine ln 1 plus x. And so the key learning point I will take from this part of the question is that if you have a sine and a cosine that you need to find, they can be related by differentiation. Keep down all these notes that you have from different questions and accumulate them, so that instead of having to look through all these questions, all these tutorials and notes, you can just have one set of notes dedicated to all the key learning points you have, so that you know what are things that you should look out for. The second tip is that you should increase your exposure to different scenarios. So even if there is a novel question, you should try and do it anyway. And so for certain chapters like functions, there are certain things that are quite standard, like periodic functions, self-inverse functions, symmetrical functions, and ceiling functions. And so perhaps these scenarios may not appear again, or even in your A-level paper, but each one offers a new way of thinking about the chapter. And so in the case of periodic functions, they basically repeat themselves in a certain segment. And so let's say from x equals 0 to x equals 3, there's a certain thing. It will repeat itself from x equals 3 to 6, 6 to 9, and so on and so forth, technically creating an infinite domain. But in the case of self-inverse function, where the inverse equals the actual function, you can assume that those two functions have the same domain as well in order for it to work. But in the case of symmetrical functions, they are symmetrical about a certain vertical line. And so if you replace x with x, if you replace x with minus x, you will still get the same result. But in the case of ceiling function, which is something that I found from a rather new question, is that it maps a real number to the least integer greater than or equal to x. And so 2.1 will have 3, and minus 3.8 will have an output of minus 3. And so the point I want to get is that you should focus on the strategy rather than the answer, and look how to tackle the question, because you're gonna get a lot of funny numbers in your papers and a lot of funny fractions. But the thing is that if you can try and see what you have to do for certain chapters, you can try and get a gist of what you should do. And so if you see like a 1 plus x squared plus dot dot dot, you can reverse engineer by knowing that if you look at your MS26, this is actually a thing in your Maclaurin series, and you should try and work on an answer related to your previous Maclaurin series practice. And so this is another 2 tips, is that for the hopeless, do anything it takes during your exam, because doing something is better than nothing. Marking is actually more subjective than you think, even in subjects like math. Because if the question is difficult, And let's say hypothetically, the whole of Singapore cannot do it. Even if that's the case, the examiners will then give out the marks more leniently. That's why as long as you can provide some logical chain of thought, you can still get a mark. And so this is a personal anecdote. This was during my A-level further mathematics paper. You don't need to understand what the content is about, but basically, in the first part, I found this equation, r squared equals secant square theta over 1 plus 1 plus tangent theta all squared. And so the part I got stuck on was part C, where to determine in exact form the value of m for which y equals mx, or basically to find the gradient. Now, I spent 10 to 15 minutes on this question, and I had no idea how to do it. So, in a last-ditch attempt, I took this original equation and I replaced theta with theta plus 30 degrees, 60 degrees. Essentially, I was using guess and check. And so when I use guess and check, I try to see what angle will create a normal looking ellipse. And so eventually, when you get 180 degrees. And so by doing that, I managed to find an angle, and subsequently I can find the tangent and the gradient. And so just like that, I managed to get, let's say 4 or 5 marks around that. Maybe it's not the best answer, and what I mean by the best answer is using algebra to find the actual equation. But I did use a method that helped me get the answer nonetheless. And it's by having these last-ditch methods, when you really are tight on time and you don't know what to do, that you can try and squeeze something out. And so here are just some other last-ditch methods. So besides using guess and check to find algebraic unknowns, you can also manually use a calculator to find your arithmetic progressions and your geometric progressions. Or in the case where you get show questions, you can try and work back the answer. So you got your start point, you got your end point, and you try to fill out the in-between. And lastly, you can try and copy the answer from your GC. Now, the thing with questions is that they'll say without the use of a GC. But the thing is that examiners cannot see that you're actually using the GC. And so, let's say you have to find something power 4. You can try and find the square using the calculator, and then to get the power 4, you just say the square times the square. But we show that we are not really using a calculator by making sure we detail the entire process of how we got there. And so you can use your GC, and in some cases you have to use your GC, but you have to use it smartly. I think that is one possible way to get an answer you need. And this is the last part, is that for the hopeless, do anything it takes. And in regards to studying, you may like to procrastinate a lot. So if you cannot do the questions, try and watch YouTube videos such as On Achievers and see the math questions they have. There's tons of content available online where people go through entire math papers. And so you can try and watch it and try to internalize some of the content. Alternatively, you can read the questions and answers of practice papers that you know you won't do. Because here's the thing, we have at least 6 years of syllabus since 2017. Multiply that by the 14 JCs, we get hundreds of prelim papers each time. And the thing is that that's just prelim papers. You can count in the mid-years, your March common tests, your promos, and a lot more. And so obviously we cannot do all. But spending time to reanalyze the questions for 30 minutes is an efficient way to make use of the material you have, rather than pause or doing marking and reviewing. And so, yeah. If you haven't heard of this already, there's a Google link to this Holy Grail. Basically, inside it, there's tons of papers for most subjects available for tons of years, and basically almost all the schools in Singapore. So once you go to it, what I will do is that I'll look up one set of paper for the solutions and one set of paper for the questions. So first I will look at the questions and try and mentally plan what the solution looks like. Not necessarily write it out on paper, but just plan and think what the solution may look like and try to anticipate what's the method. I will then cross-reference to the actual answer and see if my thinking is there. Because if your thinking is there, usually you have mastered the concept already. And so after that, if it's wrong, then you take note of what makes the question interesting, difficult, or unique, and afterwards you move on to the next question. This may be slow at first, but after a while, you get used to it, and you become more acclimatized to the different content available. And so the other thing is that you don't need to get 100% to get A. The grade boundary is there about 70%. And so the thing is that you can drop marks. And so someone that gets 71% and 100%, you will still get the same grade. And so have the mindset that you can solve as much as possible. And even if there is a hard question, don't be let down, as there is some reading room available. And chances are that the rest of Singapore is also having to struggle with the question. And even if the question is brand new and you've never seen it before, there will usually be a lot of guidance. I don't have the chemistry vector question now, but you will get what I mean when you see a lot of funny questions. There will usually be followed up by a lengthy paragraph of what the thing is. And so don't be too worried about any novel question, so to speak. And so in conclusion, here is just some final tips. Is that sometimes for some questions, you have to bear through no matter how ugly the working is. Now let's say you are differentiating something multiple times. It's going to look really ugly when your fractions all over the place. But it's part of the working and it's still following a logical chain of thought. So just try and go through with it. And secondly is that increasing your exposure to different questions and scenarios will acclimatize you. And no matter how difficult the question is, it will still be very routine in the fact that it still relies on our high school fundamentals that we learned. And so there are a lot of summaries and resources that you can find on the internet. And so if you want to maximize your learning for H2 math, I say that it's important to make the most use of it and to study smartly rather than necessarily just working hard. And so that's all I have. Hope to see you in the next video.